Hi everyone, it's Vicki, and today is Tuesday, July 23rd, and I'm going to go over Lesson 14 in our Photoshop CC Classroom in a Book 2019 version. And this lesson is producing and printing consistent color. So let's get started. All right, you should see Photoshop here. I have it open and I have there's only one file for this chapter, and that is the start file. So let me get going here. Oops, let me get organized. So in this lesson, we're gonna start to understand how images are prepared for printing on presses. This isn't necessarily your at-home printing, but if you're doing some commercial work and you need to send this off to a print shop, we'll examine this image before we prepare it for final output. We'll define some RGB, grayscale, and CMYK color spaces for displaying, editing, and printing. We'll proof an image for printing, prepare an image for printing on a PostScript CMYK printer, save an image as a CMYK EPS file, and then create and print a 4-color separation. After you've done a lot of editing in Photoshop to get the effect that you want, you probably want to share or publish it in some way. And ideally, you've been editing it with the final output in mind all along, and you've managed your file resolution, your colors, file size, and all of the other aspects of the image accordingly. But sometimes as you prepare to output the file, you have another opportunity to make sure that you've done everything the right way and that your image is going to look its best. If you plan to print the image, whether you're going to print it on your own inkjet printer or send it off to a service provider for professional printing, you should perform the following tasks for the best result. Determine the final destination. Verify that the image resolution is appropriate. For professional printing, you really want to start with something as high as 300 ppi. And you might even want to consult with your production team or the printer that you're going to be using. You want to do a zoom test, so take a really close look at the image, zoom in and check for sharpness, color, any color correction that's needed, noise, or any other issues that can affect your final printed image. You want to allow for bleeds if you're sending an image off for professional printing. If any color runs to the edge of the image, you want to extend the canvas on all sides to ensure that the color is properly printed, even if the trim line isn't exact. Keep the image in the original color space until your service provider instructs you to convert it. Consider flattening large documents, but always consult with your production team first. And soft proof the image to simulate how the colors are going to print. We're going to print an 11-inch by 17-inch travel poster, and we're going to print that on a CMYK press. The Photoshop file is large because it contains several layers over here, and it has a resolution of 300 dpi. If you don't already have Photoshop open and you're following along with me, go ahead, open up Photoshop, reset the preferences if you've been doing that, and then just File, Open, navigate to Lesson 14, and go ahead and open the 14 Start file. First thing we'll do is save this as a working document. And as usual, I save mine on my desktop. Now, it's really expensive if you end up having to redo a big print job. So before you send out an image, take a few minutes and make sure everything is appropriate for the output device and that you haven't overlooked any potentially problematic details. So we'll start with the image resolution. Go up here to the menu and choose image size, and we want to verify that the final height and width are what we need for the final output. So I'm going to change my measurement, my units to inches, and I see that the width is 11 and the height is 17. So that's good. The resolution is 300. So that's good. I can just say OK and close that dialog box. Now let's look closely at this image and correct any problems. We'll zoom in and we'll look on the lower third of the poster. The photo of these tourists is a little bit muddy. So let's go over to our layers panel and choose the tourist layer and click on curve icon in order to add a curves adjustment layer. We want to clip that to the layer below it. And you can do that right here on your properties panel. There's a little list of tools, and you can clip it to the layer below just by clicking on that little icon. And that creates a clipping mask. This does ensure that the adjustment layer we're applying is only going to affect directly below it. Now in the properties panel, we'll select the white point eyedropper tool. And then let's just click on the light area on the building behind them to brighten and correct the color. That's a little bit too bright. And you can click around a little bit until you get something that's brighter, but not overblown. So now let's take a look. This statue looks a little bit flat and could use a little bump up in contrast. So let's use a levels adjustment layer on that. We'll select the statue layer, and then we'll click the levels icon to add a level adjustment layer. We want to clip that to the layer below it so that it becomes a clipping mask and will only affect the statue layer. And then in the properties panel, let's click calculate a more accurate histogram. And that little icon is right here. And this refreshes the histogram display since we've clipped it to that particular layer. And now let's move the input sliders up to punch it up a little bit. And the way you do that is you can enter these numbers or you can drag the sliders. Oh, it's starting to rain outside. How wonderful is that? So I'm going to go ahead and drag my sliders to 31, 1.6, and on 235. So you can eyeball these. This is something you would normally eyeball. You wouldn't have these values to put in, but you would just watch the layer that you're working on and adjust those until they look good. And you can see there's a lot better contrast in there now. So I can close this. You can check that out. And we'll go ahead and save the file. I'm going to pause just a minute. Don't forget to save your file. Now, because RGB and CMYK color models use different methods to display colors, each is going to reproduce a different color gamut or color range. For example, RGB uses light to produce color, so its gamut includes neon colors, like those you'd see in a neon sign. In contrast, printing inks excel at reproducing certain colors that can lie outside the RGB gamut, like some pastels and pure black. But not all RGB and CMYK gamuts are alike. Each monitor and printer model differs, and so each displays a slightly different gamut. For example, one brand of monitor may produce slightly brighter blues than another, and the color space for a device is defined by the gamut that it can reproduce. The color management system in Photoshop uses International Color Consortium, ICC, compliant color profiles that work like translators, helping to maintain color appearance even when colors are converted from one color space to another. A color profile is a description of a device's color space, such as the CMYK color space of a particular printer. You specify which profiles to use to accurately proof and print your images. Once you've selected the profiles, Photoshop can embed them into your image files so that Photoshop and other applications can consistently maintain the colors of your images. There's some really good information in your book about calibration and profiling, a little more information about the RGB and CMYK color models, and I encourage you to read those. Even if your monitor is calibrated and profiled, accurately previewing colors on screen depends on correctly setting up the color management controls in the color settings dialog box in Photoshop. By default, Photoshop is set up for color gamuts that are more appropriate for an RGB-based digital workflow. If you're preparing artwork for printing on a press, as in the document used in this lesson, you're going to want to change the settings to be more appropriate for CMYK-based pre-press production rather than screen display. So let's create some customized color settings. Go up to your Edit menu and go to Color Settings to open up the Color Settings dialog box. The bottom of the dialog box interactively describes each option. So without clicking, now don't change the settings, hover the pointer over each part of the dialog box, including the names of sections like working spaces, the menu names, and the menu options. As you move the pointer, Photoshop displays information about each item in the description area down below. We're going to choose North America Prepress 2 from the Settings menu. And the working space and the color management policy change for a prepress workflow. Then we'll go ahead and click OK. Colors on a monitor are displayed using combinations of red, green, and blue light called RGB, while printed colors are typically created using a combination of 4 ink colors: cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, called CMYK. These 4 inks are called process colors because they are the standard inks used in the 4-color printing process. Many colors produced by digital cameras and scanners are within the gamut of typical CMYK print colors. But an RGB image may contain some colors, like colored LED lights or vivid flowers, that are outside a printer's CMYK gamut. Those colors might print with less detail and saturation than expected. And some intense blue colors in RGB can shift towards purple in CMYK. Before we convert an image from RGB to CMYK, we can preview which RGB color values are outside the gamut of CMYK. So fit on screen if you're not already there, and then go up to the view and find gamut warning. And then we're going to see the out of gamut colors. Photoshop builds a color conversion table and displays a neutral gray in the image window to indicate where the colors are out of gamut. And the gray gamut warning covers much of the image, especially in the blur areas, the blue areas. A typical CMYK press can reproduce a relatively narrow range of blue compared to most RGB gamuts, so it's not unusual for an image to have RGB blue values that are outside a CMYK printing gamut. Because the gray indicator color can be hard to distinguish, let's change it to a more visible color. We'll go up to Edit. If you're on Windows, you'll go to Edit, Preferences, Transparency, and Gamut. Or here on the Mac, I'll go to Photoshop CC, Preferences, Transparency, and Gamut. Now I'll click the color sample and choose a vivid color like purple or bright green and click OK. Now that bright new color appears instead of the neutral gray as the gamut warning color, and it should be pretty obvious which colors are out of gamut. Now we'll go up to View and turn off our gamut warning to turn off the preview, and we'll simulate on screen how the document colors might print, and then we'll bring those colors into the printing gamut. So first we'll select a proof profile so that we can view an on-screen simulation of what the document colors are going to look like when they're printed. An accurate proof profile lets you proof on screen or soft proof for printed output. A proof setup defines the printing conditions, which determines the on-screen simulation. Photoshop will provide a variety of settings that will help you proof images for different uses, including different printers and devices. For this lesson, we're going to create a custom proof setup, and then we can save the settings for uses on other images that will be output the same way. We'll go up to our View menu, and we'll choose Proof Setup, and then we'll choose Custom. We want to make sure that Preview is checked here. And then from the Device to Simulate menu, we want to choose a profile that represents the final output device, like a printer that we're going to use to print the image. If we don't have a specific printer, we'll use the working CMYK US web-coded, which is version 2, CMYK, working CMYK. Let's see if we can find that exact one. It looks like my default is US Newsprint Snap 2007. I don't have the one that is in your textbook. Let me just make sure I don't. Yep, okay. So I have the default selected. And if you want to, you can choose another one of these to see what it looks like. But if you do select a different profile, make sure Preserve is not selected. So right here, you don't want that to stay selected. Now in the rendering intent, we want to make sure that relative color metric is selected. And a rendering intent determines how the color is converted from one color space to another. It preserves color relationships without sacrificing color accuracy and is the standard rendering intent for printing in North America and Europe. We want to simulate black ink and then simulate paper color, and you can see that the changes that are made in the preview behind you. Our image has lost contrast. So paper color simulates the dingy white of real paper according to the proof profile that we've chosen. And black ink simulates the dark gray that most printers actually produce instead of a solid black. But don't be alarmed by the loss of contrast and saturation that you're seeing. While the image might look worse, the soft proofing simulation is just being honest about how the image will actually print. Paper and ink simply cannot produce white and colors as brightly as a monitor. Choosing higher quality paper stock and inks can help a printed image match the screen more closely. The next step in preparing an image for output is to make any necessary color and tonal adjustments. And in this next exercise, we'll add some tonal and color adjustments to correct an off-color scan of the original poster. So that you can compare the image before and after, we're going to start by making a copy. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel this. Now I'll go up to Image, Duplicate, and say OK to duplicate the entire image. And then I'll go up to Windows, Arrange, and I'll go 2 up vertical so that we can compare these two as we work. First of all, we'll adjust the hue and saturation of the image. So we want to make sure we're working on the original, not the copy. Make sure that's selected. There we go. And now let's choose the Visit Paris layer in the Layers panel and go up to our Select menu and choose Color Range. In the Color Range dialog box, we want to go to the Select menu and choose Out of Gamut Colors, and then click OK. The colors that were marked as out of gamut earlier are now selected so that now we can make changes that only affect those areas. Let's go View, and let's select Extras. To hide the selection while we work with it, since the selection border can be distracting. So our selections are still in effect, we're just not seeing them. Now click the hue saturation, and remember you can hover over these to apply an adjustment layer. And the hue saturation includes a layer mask. Which is created by the selection that we made. Up in the Properties panel, we want to leave the hue at the default values, but we want to drag the saturation slider until the intensity of the colors looks a little bit more realistic. So you can drag it up or down, and I'm just going to use the values in the book, which dragged it down to -14. And then I'll drag the lightness to the left to darken it a bit. Not too much. There we go. Then I'll go up to my View menu and go to Gamut Warning. Let's close this so we can see it. And we've shifted most of the out of gamut colors so that they're in the working range. So you can select that again to deselect. And then View, we'll go ahead and click Extras so that we can see any selection marquees or other non-printing aids. Now we can just close that duplicate and we don't need to save it. So we just use that to shift out of gamut colors into the printing gamut by desaturating them a little bit. Well, that was quick and easy. It's kind of a basic technique, and skilled image editors would use more advanced techniques to preserve color detail while maintaining as much of the original color saturation as possible. Sometimes when an out of gamut color doesn't contain a lot of detail, like a flat blue sky like we have here, it can also be acceptable just to leave it unchanged. Now, generally, it's a good idea to work in RGB mode as long as possible so that edits can take place within the larger gamut of RGB. Also, converting between color modes can cause color rounding value errors that may result in unwanted color changes, especially over multiple conversions. Once you've made your final corrections, you're ready to convert the image to CMYK. If you think you might want to output the image to an inkjet printer or distribute it digitally later, make sure you save a copy in RGB mode before you convert it to CMYK. Click the Channels tab to bring the Channels panel to the front. And the image is currently in RGB mode, so there's 3 channels listed: red, green, and blue. The RGB channel is not actually a channel, but a composite of the 3 color channels. And you'll also see a channel named Hue Saturation 1 Mask, and this is the channel that contains the mask information in the layer currently selected in the Layers panel. So let's go up to our image, our mode, and let's switch over to CMYK color. In the warning, we're going to go ahead and select Merge, and this is warning us that we may lose some adjustment layers. If we merge the layers, it helps us to preserve the appearance of colors. And then we get another warning saying you're about to convert to CMYK using the US web-coded, or in mine, this US newsprint profile. And this may not be what we intend, but if I want to change that to a different profile, I would go Edit, Convert to Profile. And then we'll click OK. And now the Channels panel displays 4 channels: cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. And it has the CMYK composite. And so the layers were merged during the conversion, so there's only 1 layer in the Layers panel. Some professional printers request that Photoshop images be submitted in EPS format. While this format is used less often in newer pre-press workflows, it's still good to know how to convert a document into it. So now we'll save this as an EPS file in CMYK mode. We'll go up to File, Save As, and in the dialog box here, move this out of the way. We want to choose Photoshop EPS from the Format menu. And under Color, you want to select Use Proof Setup, Working CMYK. Then we'll accept the name and where it's being saved to. And then we can click Save. Let me move this out of the way. And then say OK in the EPS dialog box that opens up. And then you can save and close. The working PSD file. And then we'll go to File Open, and I will navigate to my 14 working EPS file. And open that up. You can proof your image by printing a color composite, which is also often called a color comp. And this is a single print that combines the red, green, and blue channels of an RGB image or the cyan, magenta, yellow, and black channels of a CMYK image, and will indicate what the final printed image will look like. If you're printing color separations of an image directly from Photoshop, you're usually going to typically use the following workflow. You'll probably set the parameters for the halftone screen, which you would want to consult with your print service for recommended settings. Print test separations to make sure objects appear on the correct separation, and print the final separations to plate or film. That particular step is usually performed by your print service provider. When you print color separations, Photoshop will print a separate sheet or plate for each ink. For a CMYK image, it will print 4 plates, 1 for each process color. And in this exercise, we'll print color separations. So with the 14 working EPS image, go to File and go to Print. By default, Photoshop will print any document as a composite. So if we want to print this as separations, we have to set it up accordingly in the Print Settings dialog box. So in this dialog box that popped up, in the Printer section, I'll make sure I have my own printer selected. And in the Color Management area, choose Separations from the color handling. In the position and size, verify that the settings are correct. And this is probably going to be too large for my desktop, so I might want to just scale this to fit the media. And then I'll go ahead and click Print. But in this case, I don't really want to print, so I'm just going to go ahead and cancel. If you wanted to save these current print settings, you could just press Done, and those would be saved. But I'm going to go ahead and print Cancel. So in this lesson, we've sort of took a quick look at printing and producing consistent color using Photoshop. If you are printing to a desktop printer, you can experiment with some of the different settings to find the best color and print settings for your own system. If you're preparing images for professional printing, you want to consult with your print service provider to determine the best settings to use. And there's a lot more information on the Photoshop help site. And there's a really great little blurb on page 362 about printing to a desktop inkjet printer. So thanks for working along with me. I'll go ahead and end this recording now, and have a great afternoon.